W1 first claimed that there was no bounty, that he did not commit the murder for money. He did it under duress and magically changed his story. They realized what he was saying was cap, probably when the SSI removed the allegation that Diddy actually paid the bounty.
Fresh court documents just dropped in Lil Durk's case, and they reveal something absolutely explosive. The main witness has been caught lying. His story kept changing, and the government quietly tried to cover it up. But here's what nobody's telling you about why this might actually backfire on Durk. The breaking news and initial analysis. We've got some absolutely explosive, fresh off the press, Lil Durk paperwork that just dropped, and the internet is going absolutely wild right now. I'm talking about brand new court documents that have people divided right down the middle. Some folks are saying this might finally be the break that Durk needs, while others are looking at this paperwork with a much more cautious, skeptical eye. And let me tell you, after going through all 11 pages of these legal documents myself, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, making detailed notes on absolutely everything contained within these filings, I can tell you right now that this situation is far more nuanced, far more complicated, and far more intriguing than what you're probably seeing in your Twitter timeline or Instagram stories. Now, before we dive deep into the absolute trenches of these court documents, before we break down every single argument that Durk's legal team is making, and before we analyze what this could potentially mean for his case moving forward, I need to be completely transparent with you about something.
I've said quite a few times on this channel that I personally think, in my personal, honest, own, personal, just me, not trying to get sued opinion, is that Lil Durk is perhaps cooked. He is perhaps overly cooked. He's perhaps grilled, charbroiled perhaps. But realistically, a lot of people think that I'm capping. A lot of people think I've got the wrong opinion.
Now, I'm sharing that perspective with you, not because I want to rain on anyone's parade, not because I'm trying to be pessimistic for the sake of being pessimistic, but because I think it's absolutely crucial that we approach these court documents with clear eyes, with realistic expectations, and with a genuine understanding of what they actually say versus what people might want them to say. And here's the thing that's really important to understand as we go through this analysis together. A lot of people, including some pretty prominent voices in the hip-hop commentary space, genuinely believe that Lil Durk is going to beat this case. One of those people is Seti Nash, who just posted this new paperwork on his Instagram story and as a full post on his Instagram feed. Seti has been consistent from the very beginning, maintaining his position that Durk is going to go free. And you know what? I want to give his perspective its proper due. I want to present his viewpoint fairly and completely because that's what good analysis requires. But then, after we've looked at what Seti and others who are optimistic about Durk's chances are saying, we're going to go through this paperwork together, page by page, argument by argument, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why I personally remain unconvinced that this is the smoking gun, the game-changing evidence, the case-closing argument that some people are making it out to be. However, and this is a massive, gigantic, absolutely enormous however, I do genuinely believe that this new piece of paperwork, these new legal arguments that Durk's team is putting forward, this could absolutely be make or break for his case. We might legitimately see things start to shift in a positive direction for Durk. We might see the momentum of this case begin to change, but there's a condition attached to that possibility. There's a big, fat, enormous 400-pound if sitting right in the middle of this whole situation.
If, and that's a big, fat, enormous 400-pound if, the government doesn't clap back in a powerful way. But if the government does clap back in a way that I think they might clap back, it will be over for Lil Durk and he will be fully cooked like a rotisserie chicken.
That's the reality of the situation that we're dealing with here. And that's what makes this particular filing so absolutely fascinating from a legal standpoint. There's tremendous nuance to this entire situation. Layers upon layers of legal strategy and maneuvering. And honestly, when you really get down to it, when you strip away all the noise and all the speculation and all the hot takes, it genuinely all comes down to, quite literally, the last couple of lines of this 11-page document. Those final paragraphs, those closing arguments, that's where the real story lies. That's where the actual legal strategy becomes crystal clear. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you through this entire document, breaking down all the key arguments, explaining all the legal terminology, contextualizing what Durk's lawyers are actually saying versus what the government has been claiming. I've just finished reading the entire 11-page document multiple times. I've made comprehensive notes on everything important, every significant claim, every strategic legal maneuver, and I'm going to break it all down for you in a way that makes sense, in a way that cuts through the legal jargon jargon and gets to the heart of what's actually happening here. But before we dive into the deep analysis, before we start going page by page through these court filings, let's look at what Seti Nash had to say about this development. In his post breaking down this paperwork, Seti highlighted some absolutely crucial passages, some really important details that speak to the heart of what Durk's defense team is arguing.
So here you say right here, if that doubt eliminating discovery existed, the government would certainly have cited to it in its oppression, yet it does not. Indeed, nowhere does the discovery set forth anything resembling a fixed or coherent theory of the time, place, and circumstances of the bounty, allegations, or at the direction of the allegations. On the contrary, the discovery reveals government witnesses who are consistently changing their stories.
Now, this is absolutely explosive stuff, right? The main witness, referred to as PW1 in the court documents, apparently has given multiple different versions of events. According to Durk's legal team's filing, this witness first asserted that there was no bounty at all, claiming that he didn't agree to commit murder for monetary gain and that he acted under duress instead. But then, as Seti points out in his analysis, the story appears to change. The narrative shifts, and suddenly we're hearing about bounties and payments and money changing hands. The deep dive into legal arguments. The document continues with even more damaging information about how this witness's testimony has allegedly shifted and changed.
But as one might expect, in a murder for hire prosecution predicated on the existence of a bounty, he rises to meet the occasion. In one government proffer session, PW1 recounts how Mr. Wilson allegedly stayed behind in Los Angeles after the other participants flew out in order to collect the bounty money for distribution.
This is genuinely significant information that deserves our careful attention and analysis. What Durk's lawyers are essentially arguing here is that the government's star witness has been caught in what appears to be a lie, and the government's response to discovering this lie was to quietly remove certain allegations from their indictment between the first superseding indictment and the second superseding indictment. That's not a small thing. That's not an insignificant detail. That's the kind of thing that can raise serious questions about witness credibility, about the reliability of testimony, about the foundation upon which this entire prosecution is being built.
When the government's witnesses are constantly changing their stories about crucial facts, as the discovery catalogs here, Mr. Banks' defense must take aim at a moving target that is fundamentally unfair.
After sharing this information, Seti made it clear that he was going to let other commentators and bloggers have this story, that he was going to step back and allow the analysis to flow through the community. And I genuinely appreciate that alley-oop, that assist, because this is the kind of story that deserves thorough, detailed, comprehensive analysis from multiple perspectives. But here's where we need to pump the brakes a little bit. Here's where we need to inject some reality and some careful thinking into this conversation. After reading through this entire 11-page document myself, after making detailed notes on every argument, every claim, every piece of evidence referenced, I can tell you that there are some very nuanced details that are easy to miss if you're just skimming through, some important context that doesn't make it into the Instagram posts and Twitter threads, some crucial legal realities that change how we should interpret what Durk's team is actually arguing here. This really is a make or break moment, a crucial juncture in this case, but I don't think this is necessarily the outright, clear-cut, unambiguous victory that it's being portrayed as by some people. What I think this actually represents is more like an ultimatum being delivered to the prosecution, a legal challenge being thrown down that says, essentially, you claim you have all this evidence, you claim you have proof of these allegations, well, show us, put up or shut up. The defense is basically saying to the government, you don't have anything concrete, so show us exactly what you've got. And here's the crucial part that people need to understand. If the government comes back and shows them exactly what they have, if they fill in all the gaps that Durk's legal team is calling out in these filings, if they provide all the specific details about times, places, circumstances, and concrete evidence, then Durk's situation becomes significantly more serious, significantly more precarious. Think of it this way. The prosecution has put together a puzzle, and there are currently a few pieces that appear to be missing, at least from what's been presented in the indictment. Durk's lawyers are now saying, if you don't have these pieces, you're not going to be able to finish this puzzle, and this whole case should fall apart. It's an all or nothing gambit, a high-stakes legal maneuver. But if the government comes back and says, actually, here's this piece, here's this piece, here's this piece, and those pieces slot perfectly into those Durk-shaped, Durk-sized holes in the puzzle, fitting together seamlessly with all the evidence they've already presented, then this could go very badly for the defense. Let me break down the actual legal document for you now. This filing titled, Durk Banks' Reply in Support of His Motion to Dismiss dismiss the entire indictment as a result of vagueness, or in the alternative for a bill of particulars. That's a mouthful of legal terminology, but what it essentially means is this. Durk's lawyers are making a circular argument that comes back to a central point at the very end of the paperwork. They're asking the government to either dismiss the entire indictment completely or to provide much more specific, detailed information about exactly what they're alleging Durk did, when he did it, where he did it, and how he did it. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you about something. I view this as essentially a Hail Mary pass, a desperate but potentially strategic legal move, because if the government actually comes back with the missing information, with the specific details that fill in all these gaps, with concrete evidence of times, places, and circumstances, then Durk's legal position becomes much weaker. It's very unlikely that they're just going to dismiss the entire indictment and drop all charges. There's maybe a small chance, a slim possibility, that they come back with something flimsy, something weak, something that doesn't adequately address the defense's concerns. But honestly, based on how these federal cases typically work, based on the resources and preparation that goes into these kinds of prosecutions, I'm not feeling like this is necessarily going to result in the biggest win for Durk. But let's get into the specific details. Let's break down exactly what's being argued here. On the early pages of this filing, Durk's lawyers are basically arguing that the indictment is impermissibly vague because it doesn't specify exactly what the alleged bounty on Quando Rondo's head actually was. Now, there's going to be a lot of reaction to this from certain corners of the internet, a lot of people who are going to jump on this and say, see, look, there wasn't any bounty, they don't have anything on him, the whole case is falling apart. But that's not actually what the document says, and it's not what the legal situation actually is. The government has already explained in their previous filings that they don't want to reveal certain specific details because doing so would compromise their witnesses, would potentially put people's families in danger, would expose confidential sources to retaliation. Those are legitimate concerns in a case involving alleged gang activity, alleged violence, alleged murder-for-hire schemes. The critical analysis and what this really means. But now Durk's legal team has given them an ultimatum, has forced their hand to some degree, and the prosecution is probably going to have to come back with more specific information, more concrete details, more evidence that addresses these vagueness concerns. What's particularly interesting in the filing is that the defense wanted to clarify two very specific things: the alleged bounty itself and what they call the pervasive yet vague at the direction of accusations. The defense argues that these are the two main things the government needs to prove for a murder-for-hire charge to stick. First, what was the actual bounty? What was the hiring aspect? What was the payment? What was being offered? If this was a LinkedIn job posting, what would the salary and benefits package look like? And second, what were the specific directions given? What were the instructions? What was communicated? What did Durk allegedly tell people to do? Again, going back to that LinkedIn analogy, what was the actual job description? What were the specific responsibilities and tasks being assigned? Durk's lawyers are asserting that the government has failed to provide this information with sufficient specificity. The opposition, they argue, recites at great length various details in the indictment that are actually irrelevant to this particular motion, and then states in a conclusory fashion, meaning they just assert it without really proving it, that the discovery materials fill in any missing pieces on these essential elements without actually explaining how or laying out a clear record for the court to evaluate whether that's genuinely true. Now, the government and defense have already gone back and forth about these points in previous filings. The government's position has essentially been, look, it's very obvious what happened here. We've got information from multiple witnesses. We don't need to give you Durk's iCloud data specifically because we've got other people's messages, we've got communications that Durk sent to other people and that were received by other people. We've got everything you need to understand what happened. We don't need to prove anything else beyond what we've already provided in discovery. The defense is now clapping back and saying that the government's claim that everything provided in discovery is sufficient, is cap, is false, is inadequate. Whether or not that argument is going to be accepted by the judge, whether or not the prosecution is going to respond with more detailed information, I genuinely don't know at this stage. But it's definitely spicy, it's definitely contentious, and it raises some interesting questions about what happens next. There's also this interesting dynamic where the defense is essentially suggesting that they're not being allowed to see the evidence that's being used against Durk before trial, and they're arguing that's fundamentally unfair. The filing states that the court should see through what they call a smoke screen and decline inclined to blindly take the government's word that the discovery materials put Mr. Banks on constitutionally sufficient notice of what he's being charged with. The defense argues that without the court's intervention, this vague indictment becomes essentially a blank check that the government has written to itself, allowing Durk's prosecution on facts that were not presented to the grand jury, that would take him by surprise at trial, and that are continually shifting as government cooperators change their stories. Now, they're going to make some very harsh, very pointed arguments, suggesting that the cooperating witness keeps changing their story, keeps shifting their narrative. But I want to explain why I think that particular argument is a bit of a stretch, why I think some people are jumping the gun a little bit on that point. The indictment allegedly doesn't state where, when, or why the bounty was placed, and the defense argues this is absolutely essential information for a murder-for-hire charge. The filing takes issue with what it identifies as only two deficiencies in the indictment. The first deficiency is that the indictment fails to allege the essential facts with reasonable particularity regarding time, place, and circumstances related to the alleged bounty. According to the footnote in the filing, the indictment alleges only that at some point during a nearly 2-year time frame between November 6, 2020, the death of King Von, and August 22, 2022, the murder of Xavier Robinson, Mr. Banks made clear in coded language to various defendants and co-conspirators that he would pay a bounty or monetary reward and or provide lucrative music opportunities to anyone who participated in killing Taekwon Bowman. Now, here's what's really important to understand about why people think this is such a gotcha moment, such a devastating argument. Durk's lawyers are essentially saying, you haven't told us when, where, or why this bounty was offered. You're saying it was money and lucrative music opportunities, but you're being impossibly vague about the specifics. But here's the thing, we don't yet know whether the government is going to come back and provide those specifics. Maybe they'll respond with something like, on Wednesday, November 5th, 2021, Durk sent a group text to OTF members saying he's only giving verses to people who are taking shots at Quando Rondo. If they have that kind of specific evidence, if they can provide that level of detail, then this whole vagueness argument falls apart completely. Alternatively, if the government can't come back with anything concrete at all, at the very minimum they would need to present testimony from a witness who can explain the specifics. Maybe there's a confidential witness who can testify, look, Durk basically told people it's $20,000 if you shoot at Quando, $50,000 if you kill him, plus you get a verse on a song. That's not as strong as having an actual text message from Durk explicitly saying he's offering verses to anyone who tries to kill Quando, but it's still something substantial, it's still evidence that would be admissible in court, and it's still much better than what a lot of people are suggesting when they claim the government has absolutely nothing. The reality is that the government does have something, we just don't know exactly what it is yet. We don't know how strong it is, we don't know how specific and detailed it is. And if the government claps back and provides the who, what, where, when, and why, if they provide the time, place, and circumstances of these alleged bounty offers, then the defense's argument about vagueness essentially evaporates. Think about it this way. The defense is saying it's so vague that it only alleges something happened at some point during a nearly 2-year time frame, but the government might come back with 100 different instances of Durk allegedly offering money, versus career opportunities, and rallying gang members to target Quando Rondo. They might provide one clear instance, they might provide multiple instances, but if they can't provide any specific instances at all, then I would agree that this isn't necessarily a strong enough case to proceed to trial. However, I genuinely don't think that's going to be the situation we end up in. As we move through the document, what we see is something that I find personally quite interesting from a legal strategy standpoint. Durk doesn't actually argue about any of the other alleged vagueness in the case, and I'm not going to lie, this feels to me like it might be somewhat throwing the other co-defendants under the bus to some degree. Now, I don't want to go so far as to say it's telling on them, because it's really not that exactly, but what it is doing is creating a very clear distinction between Durk's alleged involvement and everyone else's alleged involvement. The filing explicitly states that the second issue is that it fails to allege essential facts about the directions that Mr. Banks allegedly gave, which are his only alleged link to crimes carried out by others in his absence. Notice the language there. It doesn't say alleged links to alleged crimes. It says alleged links to crimes carried out by others. That's implicitly acknowledging that crimes were actually carried out, just arguing that Durk wasn't there, and his connection to them is tenuous. It goes on to explicitly state that Mr. Banks argues vagueness on these two topics only, and that Mr. Banks doesn't argue that the indictment is fatally vague in any other way. The filing specifically lists everything Durk is not challenging: the motive for the murder, the date, time, circumstances of the stalking, the gun possession charges, the murder itself, what facility of interstate commerce was used, or the overt acts necessary necessary to support a conspiracy charge. The lawyer is essentially saying, those other guys, they're cooked, but you can't prove Durk's connection to what they did. This is a calculated legal strategy, and I understand why they're doing it. Sometimes you have to make these kinds of strategic choices. You're essentially saying, yes, those defendants are facing serious evidence for murder and other crimes, but the murder for hire charge against Durk specifically, you don't have adequate evidence for that particular charge. At the end of the day, what we're looking at here is a high-stakes legal chess match. This filing is essentially an ultimatum to the prosecution. Either dismiss the indictment or provide the specific details you claim to have. If the government can't provide those details, Durk's team wins this round. But if the government comes back with concrete, specific, detailed evidence that fills in all these gaps, then this could backfire spectacularly on the defense. Only time will tell how this plays out, but one thing is certain, we're witnessing a critical moment in this case, and the prosecution's response to this filing will likely determine the trajectory of everything that follows. So where does all of this leave us when we really step back and look at the bigger picture of what's happening in Lil Durk's case? Well, the honest answer is that we're standing at an absolutely critical crossroads, a genuine turning point that could swing this case dramatically in either direction, depending on how the prosecution chooses to respond to these aggressive legal challenges that Durk's defense team has just laid out. What we're witnessing here is essentially a legal ultimatum being delivered, a strategic challenge that forces the government's hand and demands that they either put up concrete evidence or seriously reconsider the strength of their murder for hire allegations against Durk specifically. The defense has drawn a clear line in the sand, pointing to what they characterize as fatal vagueness in the indictment, particularly regarding the alleged bounty and the specific directions that Durk supposedly gave to his co-defendants. Now, the optimists, people like Seti Nash and others who believe Durk is going to beat this case, are looking at this filing and seeing vindication, seeing proof that the government's case has serious holes, seeing evidence that the main witness has been caught changing his story in ways that undermine his credibility. And you know what? Those are legitimate observations based on what's actually written in these court documents. The fact that the witness allegedly first claimed there was no bounty, then changed his story, and that the government quietly removed certain allegations between indictments. That's genuinely significant, and it absolutely raises questions about the reliability of the prosecution's case. But here's the reality that we need to keep in mind as we watch this situation unfold. Federal prosecutors don't typically bring these kinds of high-profile cases against major celebrities unless they believe they have substantial evidence to back up their charges. They have resources, they have time, they have investigative tools that allow them to build comprehensive cases. So while this filing exposes what the defense characterizes as gaps and vagueness in the current indictment, the real question is whether the prosecution can fill those gaps when they respond. If the government comes back with specific dates, specific communications, specific witness testimony that addresses every single concern raised in this filing, if they can point to concrete evidence of when the bounty was offered, how much it was for, what instructions were given, and who was present when these conversations happened, then Durk's legal situation becomes significantly more precarious, regardless of how strong this current filing might seem. On the other hand, if the prosecution's response is weak, if they can't provide the specificity that the defense is demanding, if they continue to rely on vague timeframes and general allegations without concrete supporting evidence, then this filing could genuinely represent a major victory for Durk's legal team and could potentially lead to some charges being dismissed or the case being seriously weakened. The bottom line is this: we're in a waiting period now, a crucial moment where the prosecution's response will tell us everything we need to know about the true strength of their case. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Stay tuned, because whatever happens next is going to be absolutely pivotal for Lil Durk's future. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.